spend this time with you this morning, just sharing my journey. I told Pastor Rob, I'm not a preacher, but I can tell a story. And so I hope that you are blessed with my story and just see how, without a doubt, how God led in my life. Let's begin with prayer real fast. Father God, I thank you so much for this opportunity. I thank you for the holiday season where we can be with family, Lord. We can laugh and enjoy and make wonderful memories, Lord. And we also remember your precious baby boy who came all those years ago to save us, Lord. I pray that you'd be with us today. Help this be just a high Sabbath, Lord. And I just thank you again for being a God who's just a prayer away. In your name we pray. Amen. So the title of my sermon is God Had a Plan. And I will tell you that just by a quick show of hands, how many of you are first generation Adventist? Second generation? Third? Fourth? Okay, yeah, maybe, okay. Well, I did not grow up Seventh-day Adventist. In fact, I'm the only Adventist in my family. And I remember when I first found out about this term Seventh-day Adventist in SDA, it was in 5th grade. I had gone to a public school, and my parents were very unhappy with the public school there. And near where my father worked, there happened to be a school. And I don't think my parents knew exactly what it was, but they found out that it was, they talked about Jesus. There was a cross there. They had Christmas programs, and they thought, hey, that's the school for our kid. And they sent me there. That school was in Greensboro, North Carolina, and it's East Market Street Seventh-day Adventist Church and school. So that's where I went. And there I learned things such as, you guys went to church on the wrong day. Saturday? Who goes to church on Saturday? Shouldn't you be up watching Saturday morning cartoons and going out and playing and doing all this stuff? No. We went to church. What? And then I found out about weird foods like Wham and Big Franks and gluten and Special K-Loaf. I'm like, well, what's wrong with the steak? I mean, what's your problem? Oh, we don't do that. You know, you didn't wear jewelry. You didn't have real Boy Scouts. I heard about Pathfinders. I was like, what in the world's a Pathfinder? You guys go camping? Yes. Do you know how to make fires? Yes. You know, I said, well, you're Boy Scouts. No, we're Pathfinders. We're vegetarian. And I thought, oh, okay. So I'm figuring this all out. And then what really blew my little kid brain, horror of horrors, on Halloween, they didn't go out and collect candy. They handed out little tracts or collected food for the poor. And I thought, Seventh-day Adventists are a bunch of weirdos. That's what I thought in my 5th grade brain, just a bunch of weirdos. Well, so I graduated from East Market Street and went to Tri-City Junior Academy. And while I was there, I met some wonderful teachers, Mr. Freeman, who I believe is still working all these years later, but he was my homeroom teacher there, and he had Bible studies at his house. And I freely admit, when I went to these Bible studies, it was just there to kind of hang out with my friends a little bit, but I couldn't help but be influenced by these bits of spiritual truth, these seeds that Mr. Freeman was planting in my soul. Well, that school only went to 10th grade, and so from there, it was like, well, where to go? Well, everybody went to boarding school, Mount Pisgah, in Asheville, North Carolina. So I went to Mount Pisgah, and in my junior year, it was my junior year that I went there, and at boarding school, you have to work. Now, when I got there, I heard about these wonderful, cushy jobs, like you could work in the office. Hello, this is... I want to say Miramonte. This is Mount Pisgah Academy. How can I help you? I didn't get that job. Some other people got to be TAs and sit and grade papers and here, Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so. No, I got stuck out in the 200-degree southern heat, mowing grass and raking and pulling up weeds and blackberries out there, and it was awful. However, I did meet the facilities manager, the guy who managed all of these guys out there doing the work. His name was Mr. Meyer. And Mr. Meyer was a pretty great guy. He really was. And a slight aside, one day our physics teacher had gotten sick. We're sitting there in class, and Mr. Meyer comes in. He's wearing his dirty old overalls, and he smells of grass and gasoline. And he walks up front, he whips out a piece of chalk, And today's lesson is, and he starts writing this complicated formula on the equation on the board, and we're all looking like, well, what does he know? I mean, he's the maintenance guy. Well, come to find out, he's a retired NASA physicist. So actually, he knew quite a bit. And it just kind of blew our brains like, whoa, don't judge a book by its cover. Not at all. So, again, Mr. Meyer was a pretty good dude, but I saw him as all other Seventh-day Adventists. Nice, but weird. One day, Mr. Meyer, we were going around collecting the mowers. What he would do is he had this big truck and trailer and had a bunch of mowers, and he would drop us off around the campus. And we'd be mowing, and then he'd come back, an hour or so later, and he'd pick us all up. Well, he had picked me up. My mower was in the back. And we're driving along, and I look, and I see a most unusual sight. I see a friend of mine streaking across the campus as fast as he can run, but he's shedding clothing as he's running. And as we got closer, we discovered he was swearing very, very, very loudly. And I remember Mr. Meyer looks over at me and he says, well, that's something you don't see every day. So we went following my friend, and we found out the poor guy had been mowing the grass, and he went right over a yellow jacket's nest. And they came swarming out of there, and, he got it really bad. So we're able to get him in, get him cleaned up a bit, and got him to the nurse. And I remember he was sitting there later, and he was crying, and his face looked terrible, and he was swollen up all over the place. And through his chokes of tears, Mr. Meyer, I'm so sorry for all of the cursing that you heard, that the whole campus heard, actually. And I remember Mr. Meyer took his arm and he put it around my friend, and he said, there are times in life when aw shucks doesn't quite cut it. And I'll tell you that running over a nest of yellow jackets is probably one of those times. If I had been there, I would have been running and screaming too, and probably talking in tongues just as you were. And I remember looking at Mr. Meyer, and I thought, here's a weird Seventh-day Adventist who admitted he probably would have been using some colorful language as well. I'll have to keep my eye on this guy. Well, Mr. Meyer was married, and his wife was one of the cooks in the kitchen. She was a plump lady, really big heart. Everybody loved Mrs. Meyer. Everybody loved her food. And on Friday nights, they would have Bible studies. Now, again, I would love to tell you that I went to Bible study because I wanted to be a much better Christian, and I wanted to learn to serve the Lord a whole lot better. None of that was true at the time. He had a very attractive daughter. And myself and several other young teenage boys thought, hey, this would be opportunity to be a little closer to this lovely young lady, and who knows? Now, she was much older than all of us, but a guy can hope. And while we were sitting there hearing all of these spiritual truths, that's when I decided to give my heart to Christ. Now, I did grow up in a religious family. I hadn't been baptized before. But I was struck by the truth of the Seventh-day Adventist message. And it was then I decided, like I said, to become baptized. And I remember, when we were packing to move down here, we moved down here in July. And of course, you're packing up everything and you find things you had lost. I found this little bookmark that had my name on it, and it had a Bible verse. And it was given to me by the Myers when I was baptized. And I'll tell you, church, that God knew that the Myers could reach me in a way that no one else could at that time. Here's Mr. Meyer, Mr. Guy who goes around and occasionally yells at teenage boys, as one does from time to time, and admitted he might have been using some colorful language, but he loved God and he was not afraid to tell you about his Jesus. And that just really struck me. And I just thought, if this is what a Seventh-day Adventist is, I can be one too. And I praise God for the Myers, and I am thankful because, again, I can tell you, if it weren't for them, I would not be in the church today. God had a plan. So I graduated Southern. I graduated Mount Pisgah, and I went to Southern. And when I went there, I became a biology major. Why? Honestly, I'm not sure. I've always been good in science, always have been. And so I thought, well, hey, here I get to learn a whole lot more. And so I was taking the classes, having a wonderful time, learning lots of things. However, during my sophomore year, I began to have a thought in my head that I'm not doing what I should be doing. I should be doing something else. And I just kind of thought about that a little bit. And the funny thing is, the thought was, you should be a music major. Now, I did sort of play the saxophone, if you want to call it that. Not very well, not at all. I just kind of, grunted along and was quiet when the teacher got close. However, we went on Christmas break. That idea kept nagging me. Went on Christmas break. Was gone for, a couple of weeks. And then you come back, and about that time, we were supposed to meet with our supervising professors. Mine at the time was Dr. Nairati. He was chairman of the biology department at Southern. And I get to his office, I sit down, and he goes to his file cabinet, he opens the drawers, and he says, so, Anthony, let's see how your courses are going and what classes you need for third quarter. And he's looking around a few minutes, and I look over, and he says, I can't find your file. I'm like, what do you mean you can't find my file? He says, I don't know, it's just not here. So he called down to the records office, and I was overhearing parts of the conversation, and he turns to me later after he hangs up, and he says, your file has been transferred. Did you transfer your file? No, I did not transfer my file. I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, well, you need to go down to the records office because your file has been transferred. You need to go find out what's happened. So I walk down there, and I go to records, and they say, yes, your file has been transferred. And they pulled out the file, and they opened it and showed me. Now, if you're unfamiliar, when you add and drop classes, even at the high school level, they don't let you just willy-nilly do it, but at the university, college level, it's a more complicated thing. What had happened was all of my science classes had been dropped. You have an add drop form. All of them had been dropped, and music classes had all been added. But here's the thing. There were signatures from each of the biology professors to drop their classes. And for the music department, there were signatures to add all of their classes, but not a single professor remembers ever signing anything. And I'm looking at this, and that's like God whacking you over the head with a 2x4 going, you're in the wrong field. I want you to do this. Now, I wish I could tell you that I took that message, but sometimes even when God is staring us right in the face, we choose to ignore it or we turn a blind eye to it. I was mad about it. Someone just ruined my schedule. What are they doing? And so I went and dropped all of the music classes and then re-signed up for all of these biology classes. And that lasted about a week, maybe two. And again, God is hitting me over the head saying, what are you doing? Do you not see this miracle? So I went back to records, got another add drop form, and redid the whole thing. By that time, I think the professors were all kind of sick of me at the time and just wished I would just go away. But that's how I ended up as a music major. Now, while I was there, I continued to take science classes. I had taken a fair amount already, and I wanted to keep a foot in the door in my science classes. So one of the classes I took was called Natural Vertebrate History, and that was probably my favorite class that I took at Southern. The professor, his name was Dr. Hayes, and Dr. Hayes was doing research on whether venomous snakes could control the release of venom. And he got this, I asked him, well, why in the world would you study that? And he talked about one time he was playing with a rattlesnake. You can already see it's going to go bad. He's messing around with a rattlesnake, and he's trying to impress a young lady. And while he's fooling around with the rattlesnake, he gets bitten. And she's like, oh, you got bitten by a rattlesnake. He's like, no, it's okay. It's just a scratch. It's fine. But there's a paper I got to get finished. I'm going to have to go now. So here, I'll just, you know what? Can you just see yourself back to the dorm? I got to put the snake away, and I really got something I need to do. As soon as she's gone, he gets in his car, and he's like driving to the hospital, freaking out, right? He finds out that it had given him a dry bite, and that got him thinking. But at that time, he already had his master's in herpetology. And at the time, he began thinking, I wonder if a snake can control. And then I won't take you through all of the science of it all, but it is very fascinating. And what's cool thing about that class is we got to go around and help him collect venomous snakes. rattlesnakes and copperheads and other things we were going on. So it was a really great class, but it was definitely a class you paid attention in when you were in that class. As I'll tell you, if anybody ever heard a rattlesnake out in the wild, when you're walking along and you hear that, everybody freezes and you begin looking around and we find the snake and we carefully get it. Well, in that class, we had to create what was called a curriculum vitae. It's kind of like a really slimmed down resume. And because I had gone into music, I decided to do music education. And we were assigned to meet with a representative from the Southern Conference, their education department. And for whatever reason, that particular day, I was just in a bad mood. I don't know what was wrong with me, but I walked into the guy's room. I rudely tossed the curriculum vitae onto his desk, and I walked out without a word. And I'm ashamed about it now when I look back at so many years ago. I don't know why I did that, but I did. And what he should have done was balled it up and thrown it away, but he didn't, because God had a plan. Now, later that year, I began to do my student teaching. And today, an education major would start student teaching. They would start getting in the classroom pretty much their freshman year. It would be really, really early. But at the time, Southern didn't do that until your senior year. And so I taught at 3 public schools in Georgia. For those of you who don't know, Southern is right on the border of Georgia. And so that's where I did my student teaching. First time I had been in the classroom, and I had a blast. It was wonderful. And I remember thinking, hey, this teaching gig isn't so bad. I think I could probably do this. So while student teaching is going along, I get an urgent message, call Dr. Haynes. This is a different professor. The other one was Hayes. This is Haynes. Call Dr. Haynes. It's very important. So I go racing back to Southern, and I run up to the education department. I'm thinking, someone had been in a car crash. Something's wrong with my parent. I didn't know what was going on. I'm going in there. What's wrong? What's wrong? And she looks at me and she says, you want to go to Guam? Guam? What's Guam? Where's Guam? I don't know what you're talking about. And again, I told you how that vita that I rudely tossed on the person's desk, they should have thrown it away. They didn't. So what happened was this guy, I don't remember his name, he was talking with a friend of his in the South Asia Pacific Division. And they were just shooting the breeze. They weren't talking shop, nothing like that at all. And before the conversation ended, he said, hey, by the way, we need a science and a music teacher at Guam Adventist Academy. Do you know anybody? And the guy goes over to his files and he pulls out my vita because God had a plan. So my first year, I was newly married to my lovely wife, who's sitting down here right now, that I'm embarrassing at the moment. And I would love to tell you that my first year of teaching was great and wonderful. Here I am, fresh out of school, ready to shape America's future. And it was awful. It was my very first year. You see, I was replacing a very popular teacher who decided that what he decided was wrong. However, his heart was in the right place. He was a native guy, and he felt like people coming from the mainland know nothing about our culture, nothing about our people, our language. And he felt that his culture was being lost. So what he decided to do was he formed his own school. He took half of the teachers, and he took half of the students. And so here I come, and a whole bunch of others. We all came in, brand new teachers, new principal. And again, my whole first year, all I heard was Mr. Smith, we'll call him. Mr. Smith didn't do it this way. We wish Mr. Smith was back. Mr. Smith, Mr. Smith, Mr. Smith. That's all I heard the first time. However, we continued to work hard there, and God blessed, and the school began to thrive. And my wife and I, we spent 4 wonderful years there on the island of Guam. However, we were beginning to think about coming back stateside. So we sent out resumes, a lot of resumes, and fortunately, we didn't hear back from anybody, not a single reply. And I say fortunately because what we didn't know is that my principal at the time, he had already accepted a call to go back to Georgia Cumberland Academy. We didn't know that at the time. And some other friends of ours, they had decided to stay because the Neelys were staying. And if we had gotten a job, my wife and I would have left, our friends would have left, and you lost your principal too, and Guam Adventist Academy would have been thrown right back into the mess that we had worked so hard to fix. And it would have just been, again, another difficult mess. But again, God had a plan. So in my 5th year there, I went diving pretty regularly. I enjoyed night dives in particular. And a lot of times people will say, well, weren't you afraid of sharks or things? I have been in the water with a lot of sharks. But I will tell you, it's not like you see on TV or Jaws or whatever. The only person I ever knew who got bitten by a shark, he was kind of asking for it. He was spearfishing. And typically, if you're spearfishing, you would spear the fish, and then you would swim up to the surface and put it in your boat and go back down. This gentleman decided to tie them around his waist. Yeah. He tied them around his waist because he didn't want to take the time to swim up there, and basically he turned himself into a giant fish. So tip from me to you, please don't do that. If you happen to be in the water, don't do that. So I probably had about 100 dives under my belt at the time, and a good buddy of mine, he said, hey, he had a boat. He was our maintenance guy on the island, and he said, hey, you want to go for another dive? I'm like, yeah, twist my arm. Of course I want to go on another dive. So when we got on the boat, I met 2 people, Dick and Anita Molstead. They're well-known in the Oregon Conference. Here's another person who knows who they are. Great. Guess your teacher. Awesome. Great, great people. And they were on this dive boat, and in between dives, you do what is called off-gassing. And now that I hear myself say that, that sounds terrible. What it is, if you've ever opened a soda and it fizzes out really, it makes a mess everywhere, that can happen in your blood if you're not paying attention to how much time you've spent on the water. You get the bends, it's a terrible thing. And so in between dives, you're just breathing normal air. And while I was doing that, the Molstead said, hey, we hear good things about you. You should send a resume to Oregon. And I thought, I don't want to go to Oregon. What in the world's in Oregon? Why would I want to go there? But this is all in my mind. I just smiled and nodded a whole lot, but I'm thinking, I'm not going to Oregon. Well, later on, after they left, I did send out new resumes. This was 5 years on the island, and I did send one to Oregon. And I remember the Oregon one was the one that was a real pain because they gave me a form that you had to with the little rectangular boxes. And this was long time ago when you had something called typewriters and you had to fit the paper in and all that. Yes, some of you are remembering how terrible they are. Now imagine using a typewriter, but the little arms that flip up have to fit right in these little boxes. So I'm grumbling and mad the whole time. This Oregon, who wants to go to Oregon? Sent them off in the mail. And then a little while later, I remember my principal at the time, because the former one had left, he said, hey, I got a phone call yesterday from a principal back in Oregon. He might be giving you a call. And I said, yeah, okay. Well, the next morning, I got a phone call, and it was from a guy I dearly love, a mentor of mine. His name is Bob McDonald. And Bob calls me, hi, this is Bob McDonald, principal of Portland Adventist Elementary School. I said, hello, I'm Anthony Neely. He said, so I imagine you're probably getting ready for school now. Now, what he didn't know, the school was just like 2 seconds around the corner, and I wasn't ready at all. I was still laying there in bed. And I was talking to him, and he said, hey, we would love to arrange an interview for you. And he had warned me, he said, if you take this job, we're a flagship school, we're a large school. There are a lot of demands that will be placed upon you, and so keep in mind, this is something that you're ready for. And what he didn't know, again, living on the islands, I had done a lot of public performances. We had performed for these big Vegas-style shows with my handbell choir. We would have tigers on the stage and motorcycles doing tricks and all this stuff that was going on. And I smiled and I thought, the good Lord brought me to Guam and gave me these experiences. I think if I can handle tigers and things on the stage, I think I can handle a school performance. It's probably going to be okay. However, what's interesting, I found out later, ultimately I did get the job, but what's interesting is that Portland Adventist Elementary is quite selective in its hiring process. And I, as far as I know, was the only teacher who had ever been hired sight unseen halfway around the world. Because typically there's a large number of people who are applying to get into the school. And so again, God led and impressed that hey, you know what, you guys should give Neely a chance. God had a plan. So for about 20 years now, I've been teaching algebra. And the funny thing is, I didn't go to school to be a math teacher per se. I went, as you know, music and science. However, as you're taking higher level science classes, it does require more mathematics. And so then I started taking more math classes so I could get into these science classes. And I remember one day my principal at the time, Bobby, calls me in and he says, "Hey, what do you think about teaching algebra to the middle schoolers?" And it hit me right then. Again, the idea to take these classes, I didn't need to. I had other things I could have been doing. But I took that as God leading in my life, saying, "Neely, I want you to do these things." So that when I got that call, sure, no problem at all. And it's because God had a plan in my life. Well, later on, one day, we had a new principal at the time, and I was in the teacher's workroom. I think I was making copies or so, and Barbara walked by me, and she looks at me, and she says, "You're going to be my vice principal," and kept walking. No, hey, Mr. Neely, I think you're a pretty good guy, and I would very much like for you to consider being the vice. No, she said it just like water is wet, and she kept going. She just said it like that. But here's the curious thing. Every time she left, it just seems like everything went bad. It's kind of what happened. One time she was out of town, and the office phones blew up because there was a boil water alert, and parents were panicking, that the kids had water, fresh drinking water at the school. So at that time, Portland probably had about 300 kids. Now they probably got 400 kids or so. And so suddenly you have to prepare and make sure that all the kids have safe drinking water. Another time, a young lady came into school. She was probably a second grader, maybe first, and she reeked of marijuana. Just reeked. So, of course, that's a call to Child Protective Services. That's a call. And when I called Child Protective Services, they were on furlough. Their workers weren't working for whatever reason. That just struck me. Child Protective Services is closed. I mean, what? So then I had to call the police department. On a couple of different occasions, I had to call the police. And so here's a car up front. Parents are asking questions. And then I have to negotiate, the police working with this young child. Another time I had an angry parent, a couple of angry parents, very angry parents, who threatened lawsuits against the school for really frivolous reasons, I believe. One guy, I think, was actually trying to get a quick payout of cash. Sometimes, for those who don't know, the Adventist Church is sued quite often. And typically what happens is it is cheaper for the church to give some money that is less than it's going to cost to fight it in court, to just have it go away, even if they think it's completely frivolous. And I honestly think this guy was trying to do that. And so again, I'm sitting here and having these very stressful, these very confrontational meetings. Another parent, again, with a lawsuit, and we're going to sue and all these things. And I was thinking, God, why are these things happening when she's gone? I'm the one having to deal with these things. But church, I'll tell you, praise the Lord, that I found myself up to the challenge. And I began thinking, I wonder if God's trying to tell me something. Is he hitting me over the head again, saying, "Neely, this is something I want you to do"? So then, it was then that I decided to enroll at Walla Walla Adventist University, and I pursued a master's in school administration. That degree, along with a chance encounter, I would say chance, but I don't really believe it was chance. My pastor back in Oregon, he's retired, semi-retired now. His name is Jim McMurray, and his wife is Betty McMurray. And I ran into Betty by the grapes, actually. I remember, by the grapes, and we were just shooting the breeze, and that conversation led to another, and ultimately it brought me here before you today. And I honestly believe, again, that God had a plan in my life. And I'd like to pause here for just a moment and talk about the influence of Adventist education and being taught by godly teachers. Dr. Hayes, Dr. Haynes, Mr. Freeman, the Myers, Dr. Nairati. I mean, the list can go on and on and on of all these people who played a role in my life. I told you if it weren't for the Myers, I would not be a Seventh-day Adventist today. I would probably go to church. I know I would go to church, but I would not have been an Adventist. And I'll tell you, your teachers, my teachers, spend more time with your children than you do during a school year. And really think about that. The impact that these men and women have on the souls of your children. And I'm so thankful. I'm thankful for these people. I'm thankful for the Molsteads encouraging me to come to help mold and shape the person that you see before you. And I don't believe that's by accident. I believe that is by an education system that says, hey, we're preparing you for this world. Of course we are. But there's another world to come. There's another world that the Lord has promised. And Jesus says in Matthew that where your heart is, where your treasure is as well. And so again, I'm just thankful for these people who valued Christian education to put me before you today. Church, I don't know what my future holds. I don't. My wife and I were just talking, I think it was yesterday. We were setting up some Christmas decorations and stuff, and the idea of the last time we got into these things, I didn't know about the Sunnyvale Church. I didn't know about Miramonte Christian School, but God knew. God knew about these things. And I'll tell you, I'm sometimes filled with fear and doubt as well about my own life, about my children, about just life in general. But I hope with my testimony to you today, you can see that we have no reason to fear if we see how God has led in the lives of others. Part of the reason that we come to church is to sing songs and to pray and to come together as a church family. But it is also to hear how God is leading in other people's lives. Sometimes we think, I'm speaking for myself, sometimes it's kind of like, God, I read these stories about Moses and Noah and Abraham and all this stuff, but what are you doing today? And then the other part of my brain says, do you not remember this? Do you not remember this? Do you not remember this? And I'm ashamed, and I just go, God, have mercy on me, forgive me, help my faith be stronger. And I hope that by hearing my testimony, that when your faith gets a little shaky and when Satan is whispering in your ear, you remember these times that we come together as a church family, and Pastor Rob is here, or others who are telling you how God has led. In this way, God reassures us that He is alive and He cares about our futures. My prayer for you today is that you will be open to God's leading and know that He had a plan in my life, but He has a plan in the lives of each and every one of you. God bless you.